Hi everyone, welcome to WeeklyWed from Business School of AI. WeeklyWed is our happy place to share, learn, discuss, and explore. WeeklyWed occurs every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific time. I'm your host, Yashaswini Vishwanath, and you can call me Yash. I'm logging from Bangalore, India, and I would like to know where you're all from. Please type away your name and location in the chat. We would like to get to know you better. I'm an AI researcher who focuses on responsible AI. I'm also pursuing my master's in artificial intelligence from RACE. At WeeklyWed, we empower and enable our students to break into AI or to explore and deep dive. Generally, we host speakers from varied backgrounds working on AI and ally technologies. Before I introduce the star speaker of today, here is a small clip.
You heard Camille's story. She's a mechanical engineering major. She's a great example of why we're encouraging more women and more minorities to study in high-paying fields that traditionally they haven't always participated in math and science and engineering and technology. Well, Camille's done research for NASA. She's gotten real job experience with industry partners. She's the leader of your microgravity team. And by the way, she's a sophomore. So by the time she's done, she might have invented time travel by the time she's done here at Boise.
We are bringing you Camille Eddy, a product engineer, keynote speaker at international conferences with experience in multiple firms to make you take the leap of a lifetime to break into robotics and artificial intelligence. She has earned a Bachelor of Science degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Idaho. Camille has given her talk recognizing cultural bias in AI across the world, including San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and Budapest, helping technical and non-technical project managers, founders, and engineering leaders build their products. Finally, she coaches women build online platforms, helping them make a profitable business working on their passion. Today, we have with us Camille Eddy. And hi, Camille, welcome to WeeklyWed, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the invitation. Thank you so much, Yash, for your leadership as well, and bringing us all here today. And yeah, I'm really happy and excited to talk to all of you. I'm very much, passionate about actions and being able to employ ideas and put them to use. Anything that you write down, that's really the crux of like all these ideas and all these outcomes that I've had is I wrote down an idea and then I put it into action. So I'm really excited to talk more about that with you, and I'm looking forward to it, and your questions as well at the end.
Yes. So Camille, can you share about your speech during President Obama's campaign? We did see the video of President Obama himself highlighting your achievements.
Yeah, absolutely. So he mentioned that was in my sophomore year. And you might have noticed too, right? I graduated from University of Idaho, but I went to Boise State University for a time. So I went to two schools, had two different experiences, which were amazing. Couldn't have one without the other, honestly. So I always am a proponent for making sure that your academic experience, whatever it is, whatever shape it forms, like you go in there and you make the best out of it. And that's certainly what I did. So to make that event happen for myself and for my community, foremost, right? Because that was a really big honor that I had on my shoulders, not just for myself, but for my community. It was about learning how to public speak, and it was about learning how to put myself out there and to start executing on ideas. So what happened was, I was not a public speaker when I got to college. I was one that shook and I rattled, and it was very terrifying for me at first. And my first year, I just learned how to just put myself out there and go in front of crowds and do something that I was uncomfortable with. And in that same way, the projects I was working on at that time as a sophomore, same thing. Like, I learned to put myself out there, and try new things. I have 3 rules to life, and that's say yes to everything new, don't do anything twice, and then also make your accomplishments visible. And the way I came up with that was just by trying, failing, trying again, but then also succeeding as well. So when they invited me to do the speech, which introduced President Obama to our community, I was really excited to do so. I didn't have any idea what it would entail. I got to involve my family. My mom got to come down. In the background behind him were some of my closest friends standing there on stage with him. So I got to do it really with the entire community behind me. And that was really important for me. Definitely helped me solidify myself as a leader on campus. But also, I got to push other people forward and say, like, this is something that we should all be involved in. So that's just kind of the crux of why that came about. And I'm thankful that it did.
Camille, when I read about your journey in space tech, I was inspired by your ambitious goals. And you're one of those high schoolers who went on to contribute to NASA. Can you please tell us how you could accomplish this feat?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had that goal from the very onset. When I chose my school, Boise State, I chose them because I understood that they had a really huge initiative to get undergraduates into programs, extracurricular programs. You might even say that was one of the best things that they could do for you to jumpstart your career. That was just one of their strengths at that particular institution. And I called that out very early. I started visiting their campus. I started interacting not just with, the people I was supposed to interact with, the speakers, right? I started interacting with the dean of the college. I interacted with the support staff, the teachers, anybody and everyone. And so what I learned was Boise State can really offer me these specific experiences. And when I got to school, I attacked those specific experiences. So Microgravity University was one of them, where we got to build a space tool for NASA. So the idea behind this was we want undergrads to be in charge of their own research project. And we're going to space, we're sending manned missions to space again, and specifically to the moon or to an asteroid. And we want to have some new space tools ready for our mission. And that was something very much in my wheelhouse, mechanical. But then also there was a need to be a little bit more interdisciplinary. So as the leader, I had to take on not just outreach to my own peers inside the College of Engineering, inside the mechanical engineering program, right? I also had to take on outreach to students outside of those programs, to students outside of our school. We had a outreach component. Definitely helped me again with the public speaking because I had to learn how to do that to people who weren't in my community. And then also helped me with the idea of what is it like to create an engineering project from scratch with documentation. And this is NASA, right? So they're professionals about it. And we had really good coaches. So being supported by those coaches and those mentors, people who were former astronauts, people who were just really like top level professors at the school who gave and volunteered their time to give us their resources and give us what was in their head. Being able to incorporate all those different things led to that project being successful, because it's one thing to get into the project, it's another thing to have a completed body of work. And so that was another thing that was really drilled into me in the first couple of years of school is you start something, you finish it. You set expectations, you set goals, and you work with people. And so that was how I was able to, yes, I was definitely inspired. Star Trek, all kinds of things, like Mae Jemison, the first Black female for NASA to fly into space. I was very much inspired by those things in high school. But then all that other stuff, the teamwork and the working with coaches had to come to play for me to be able to contribute a space tool to NASA's own research project. So that was really cool.
Camille, the Trainable Robotics project, which was executed at HP, shows the confluence of robotics and artificial intelligence. Can you please narrate the challenges you faced and how you overcame them? Also, I have heard all your internships were invitations from the company after they came across your work on the internet. So
Sure.
Can you tell about that?
Yeah. So my first internship was with HP, again, during the year between my sophomore year and my junior year. And just to put a finer point on that, the previous summer, during, oops, sorry, that's a doorbell, but the previous summer, during that summer where I could have been an intern, I was working in a lab on campus. So I was incrementally building up my experience and my project awareness and my my ability to tell, an external company, yes, I do have the qualifications for working at this internship. And then they put me on a project. This is how they described the project to me, okay? They were like, we want you to work on an end effector that can do multiple things and test hardware. And HP, right, is known for printers, so to test printers. So I was like, okay, how an end effector, right, is a lever, right? And it has something on the end that can accomplish something, just to be clear. And so I was like, okay, it has to be multifunctional. It needs to be able to do more than one thing. So what would that be like? What is a tool that I can think of or imagine that would be effective? So I said, okay, I know the most effective end effector is a hand, right? I just did it right here. The end of my lever, there's a hand. So I was like, let me model my end effector after a hand. And what we also wanted to do was make sure that this robot was trainable and that it could repeat its training multiple times, because another product requirement was that this should be something that could be set on its own and just do its own thing over and over and over again. Right? So that meant there's a whole other component, which is computer vision. And that's where the confluence of AI came in for me, where it was like, okay, you have the hardware, Camille, you're a mechanical engineer, you can design this, but you're gonna need to employ something to help train it and make it useful for your team. I got to work with one other intern on that project who was really helpful because she was a computer engineer. And so she helped me design the software system that we worked with. And so basically I 3D printed, designed, 3D scanned within 3 months, that summer internship time, a hand that could move. It didn't have a lot of degrees of freedom, so it wasn't like doing crazy things, but it could move in and out and it could extend and have pointers. And then what we would do is we put it in front of a normal webcam camera that was empowered with, it was an Intel SDK that could track finger joints. And so when I moved my finger in the front of the camera, it would move the robot's fingers. And the robot was powered by servo joints and it was a push-pull wire system. So that was how we designed that project. We designed it to be very nimble and scalable, right? Because it needed to be able to work within the 3 months that we were there with the resources we had at the time. So the challenges we had was definitely the timeliness of it, right? Working and using the building blocks that we had. We had a machine shop, we had a 3D printer, and just figuring out like what a planner solution was. Because again, the project statement was very simple. It was build an end effector that's multifunctional. And so that was really fun. And then yes, to answer your last point real quickly, because of the work I did at that internship and those 3 rules, right? Don't do anything twice. And then the last one specifically, make your accomplishments visible. I would get repeat calls to either go to the next internship at that same company. So maybe move a location, so I'm with a different team, or go to a different company altogether on a similar project, one they knew I would be successful for. And that also helped me not have to apply to those internships. I was invited to those internships, like you said. Yeah.
I came across the intern highlight by Google X, the moonshot story, where you were featured, and also the NVIDIA project about self-driving cars. How did these help you to dive deeper into artificial intelligence? And what do you have to say to others who want to dive deeper into artificial intelligence?
Yes, absolutely. You know, one of the things about the internships I had is they weren't traditional internships. They might be what you might call a co-op, where they were longer term. And I definitely suggest if you have the academic experience and the academic structure where you can do a longer term internship, not just 3 years. You know, I would turn 3-year internships into 2-year internships or 8-month internships. And that was really helpful because AI is complicated, and it's helpful not just to see like your project, but where your project fits in the company. And so when it came to working at Google X specifically, you know, I was working in a building that was housing all of these experimental projects. And it wasn't just robotics, but they definitely were empowered by AI. And seeing like where AI was going, or where that specific company's methodology was, not just for my team, but for all the teams that were sitting with us, that was really helpful to understand where I wanted to be, right? It was exploratory. And so I could say, yes, I like robotics. I like where I am in robotics right now, working on the hardware and the integration of software, and the two talking together, the two teams talking together. Sometimes I would be the bridge between the two. And I felt that that was a really good space for me as a long-term intern, because I didn't necessarily need to be the best at hardware, and I didn't need to be the best at software. I needed to be dangerous enough that I could get the two teams to talk to each other and know what the product requirements were, even though sometimes they were separated by like, you know, a row, or like one was on one side of the room and another team was on the other side of the room. So it was definitely a learning point for me about the complexity. Right. So when you start going to teams that are bigger, you're going to start seeing the complexity stack and stack and stack. So being able to still have intelligent conversations with people, conversations that move you forward as a team, that was scary sometimes, and it's definitely challenging. But I think that's part of any project, is about going into those places where nobody really knows what's going to happen, but they know that they've seen success before and they have the tool set to keep going.
Workspace equity is your current area of impact. And can you tell us about your work at Sector and how it is touching people's lives?
Right. Absolutely. So workspace equity is definitely a pivot from AI as far as like technically, but what I was working on inside those other AI projects was, you know, the ability to have robots do work that was menial labor and not necessarily useful for a human being to be doing, or in the situation of Google X, you know, an office aide. In the situation of NVIDIA, how do we create safe autonomous cars, right? So that had some pieces of interacting and helping impact people's lives in the future. So when I got to Sector, it was a lot more immediate, the impact that we could offer. And so what we do at Sector is we help programs who are working on workspace, also workforce equity, right? Where you might be someone who learned how to code, you became a mechanical engineer, but you're finding it difficult to get the invisible work that it takes to get into your career, to get into some of these companies, right? You know, I made my way into internships at these companies, and now I am considered, you know, a valuable candidate just based on the logos I can display on my resume, right? So for someone who doesn't have that, for someone who's starting out, how do we make sure that that education or that line of work that they've been working on Like we talk to sometimes retail workers, people who work in stores selling things off the shelves, but they've learned how to code, they've gotten the education they need. But now it's up to them to like blend the tool set together. Like you learn some things in retail, you learn some things academically, how do we blend those together? Just like I did. You know, I blended my high school career with my college career to today. So the way we impact people is it's a triangle, if you will. One side is going to be the worker. The other side is going to be maybe your collegiate experience, your boot camp experience, and then another side is going to be the company itself. And what we do at Sector is we're kind of like in the middle, or you could even say we're the other side of the square, but we're somewhere in there where we're maintaining relationships with all three sides. And a lot of times when you're going through companies who claim to want to help, you know, even your internship, it's a two-sided thing where it's you, the company, or you and the mentor. And so we realized that it was really important to keep maintaining relationships with all three sides. And we build products now that help people show up, maybe get a refresher on their coursework, learn how to interview well so that they can talk to these companies. And then we sometimes provide them like the opportunities and the recruitment, but then also like just those very, again, invisible work, those steps in between all the obvious process that will allow you to get that job. So whether that means retooling your resume, helping you with your interview style, and making sure that it's scalable, again, because we want to serve as many people as possible. It would be impossible for me to travel to every single customer's home, you know, and help them on this. So how can we make that meaningful connection through the internet, but also scale it out to as many people as possible? And then I also wrote down here, we want to balance access, right, with how much it's going to cost us, you know, to create these opportunities, because sometimes that's what also prices you out, right? The cost, the sheer cost of getting mentored or instructed on this level. I hope that was understandable, but please ask me questions about that later in the Q&A section.
Camille, recognizing cultural bias in AI highlights the AI ethics aspects of the innovations that are rapidly happening all over the world. We have heard of cognitive bias, racial bias, gender bias. We would want to know about cultural bias in AI and what we can do to mitigate such biases.
Yes, absolutely. So I think this is something that's important. Like in my bio, I talked about this. I do this talk for project managers, technical and non-technical. I do this for everybody involved, right? And it's for anybody that's building a product that should be a part of this conversation. And the point of it is that we are building products all the time, and then they get used outside of the way that we intended them to be used. And it's not just one thing to set a product loose. It's part of our maybe code of ethics, or maybe just our personal interest to see it through all the way to the endpoint. Like, how is it being used? How is it impacting people? So where culture comes in is, you know, being like trained as an intern in Silicon Valley, I really saw the machine at work, where you just churn out products. I mentioned before, right, at Google X, I was sitting in a building that housed a lot of different products. They were just churning products out. And so the question comes like, do we know who it's serving? Is it gonna serve them well? Who's building this and who's testing this? Who's using this? Like right now, like at this data point, who's using it and who's being served well? So I think culture bias, and I know culture bias comes in to play when you find that there's some blind spots. You know, you design something to be used in a certain way, but it gets to your end users and they're not using it that way. For example, right, facial recognition, it tends to not work well if you don't have proper data sets employed to do the training on it. And we're very familiar with that problem now, right? But there was a time when we weren't as familiar with it, which is normal. It's a normal process for emerging technology for those edge cases to be huge and vast. And so I think, and I know that we can, and we have the opportunity to build up AI as a product, as a industry, a little bit more cautiously, right? We know that those edge cases need to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's really the goal with culture bias. It's not just to work on some of the factors that we're used to, but to work on everything and anything, make it better than the tech world that we've been used to, than the tech that we've been building. And especially with AI having so much more capability and power than the other ways we've been building technology in the past, we can make sure that we're building for better use cases, broader use cases, while still maintaining the integrity of our project and our goals.
Camille, public speaking is not everybody's cup of tea. You're a natural at public speaking, and you have been a keynote speaker across various countries in tech and non-tech conferences. What does it take to be a public speaker, and how do we groom ourselves into trying to break into public speaking and do it professionally?
Right. Yeah, I can definitely tell you the way I did it. It's maybe not the way everybody falls into public speaking, but I mentioned before, I kind of fell into learning how to speak well and maybe not even well, but learning how to speak from a place of being comfortable, right? I feel like that for me is well enough. Like if I'm comfortable, if I can push through, if I can have failure on a stage and push through and get to the end of my speech, I did well. So the way I did it was I started just doing a lot more of it. I feel like sometimes when we're at the edge of our knowledgeable domain and we're right at the edge of it and we're looking into the unknown, we feel like, okay, I just don't have enough information or I just don't have enough support. And sometimes showing up and doing the work, even as we are, will help us garner that support. And so what I did was my first year of college, I stood out, right? I definitely stood out as a woman of color, as a Black woman in my department. And they asked me, would you be willing to go speak to the high schoolers? Would you be willing to go speak, to our donors and our esteemed alumni? And I said yes every time. I said yes to everything new. So if it was a new audience, new faces, I did it. And here's something that I did learn. It's really useful to take into context who your audience is. So now when I go and do public speaking, I don't actually come up with my beginning and my ending until right before I give my speech, because I like to walk into the room and I look at people's faces and I say, okay, I see that this room is mostly male. Okay, I'm going to really drive down on some of these points so that I know that when you get done, you have all these fire questions. Or I see that this room is mostly women of color. Oh my gosh, we're talking the same language. So I might be a little bit more cavalier, like, hey, this problem, right? You're familiar with this. So, just taking that into context, not necessarily genderizing it, but just being more open to approaching your audience as they are. That sometimes help, because I don't have to, in the back of my mind, say, is this really fitting? I kind of open myself up to offering, what I see, and then getting that feedback back. When I get really hard questions that stump me, I will often say, I'll paraphrase it with, I don't know all the answers. And then I set myself up hopefully for a little bit of success, right? That I'm gonna get you started, and then you're gonna keep going. You're gonna continue this research on your own. And then one other more practical tip, if you're about to give a speech like tomorrow, is to look at the faces, even on a Zoom call. It's sometimes more helpful when you have the faces here, but when you're in person, definitely look at the faces of the people that are coming in and sitting down. Don't just stay in the green room or stay behind the stage. Look at the people as they're coming in, so that when you get on stage, it's not a shock. You recognize some of those faces, and you can look at those faces too. They might not be able to tell that you're looking at them, but you can look at them. If someone is like, I don't get what you just said, take that opportunity not to falter, but to say, let me go back and say that again, and see if maybe they start to lean in instead of being like, I don't know what that is, lean in. And maybe that will help too, just to ease some of that fear while you're on the stage, some of that anxiety while you're on the stage.
Camille, I strongly believe that being mentored is a privilege. It is a chance to think big, and achieve a lot with the help of mentors. So I am a mentee of Sudha Jamthe and Susanna here. Sudha Jamthe and Susanna Raj have been mentoring me all along. So can you narrate about the two mentors of your life who led you to this path of high achievements?
Yes, absolutely. I'll talk about two specific mentors, and I try to highlight them whenever I give talks, especially if someone like you did just yet now, Yash, you asked me about my mentors. I try to highlight the specific people because I really do believe that they deserve credit for pouring into me like they did. So two people that come to mind is former astronaut Barbara Morgan. I mentioned her before about the microgravity and the space tooling project. She was my mentor for 4 years. So the last 2 years of high school and the first 2 years of college. And she was at the university I was studying at. And what she really helped me with was leadership style and honing in on my messaging, right? It was 2 years maybe before I started doing public speaking like I am now, but I was definitely trying to build projects and going into these situations where I was potentially in a place to be a team leader. And she helped pour into me the ideas of, how do you communicate? How do you move people? How do you build consensus? That was a big piece of it. Like if I could put that into one word, consensus is really consensus building. So maybe 2 words. That was really what she helped me learn because while I wanted to build consensus, I didn't necessarily know the practical ways to build consensus. And then another one of my mentors, Dr. Janice Samani, she was actually, again, I don't want to genderize anything or put too fine a point on it, but it is helpful when you can relate to your mentor from that perspective. If they reflect some of your identities, even if it's more than just gender, but like, I had a woman astronaut in Dr. Barbara Morgan, and then I had a Black woman PhD in Dr. Janice Samani, and that was so interesting, the difference of perspectives that they offered. Dr. Samani specifically helped me with conflict resolution. I would run into problems, like real problems, either whether they were maybe conflicts on my internship with peers. Once in a while, it could be with my higher up where I didn't see eye to eye with them. And I would be able to step back, go talk to my mentor, Dr. Samani, and say, this is what's happening. This is like the crux of the conflict that we're having. And she would be able to talk me either down from my point of view or elevate my point of view, but in a way that was more professional, or maybe had a little bit more integrity. She might ask me some hard questions where she said, it sounds like you're asking for something, but you're not getting it. Or it sounds like you're getting what you asked for, but it's not what you expected. And those are some of the hard questions that I might have had to deal with as a young intern. And it really helped me be successful later when the stakes got higher. I'm now running teams, I'm building teams myself, I'm leading people. So what do I do when, someone who is hired to work with me and under my position is having a conflict and not seeing eye to eye with me? So I felt like it was really helpful, A, to have these experiences while I was in college, because it gave me the opportunity to fail and then to rebuild after that failure. And then B, it was really helpful to have the differences of perspectives because that's just really helpful. And then also, again, I mentioned this before, right? It's not so much about having, specific identities in place, but having some type of link is really helpful because they can speak your language and really get at the crux of what you're feeling because they've been there before.
At the same time, mentoring is crucial to give back to the ecosystem. You're a founding member of Tech Ladies, contributor to Women in AI, part of many other STEM initiatives and outreach programs. How can people reach you? And what do you bring to the table to make a big difference to their life?
Absolutely. You can always reach me on Twitter, just to put that out there, at I am Camiile Eddy. And then you can also, when you do reach out, LinkedIn as well, just to put a finer point on that, my Camille Eddy on LinkedIn. But when you do reach out, and what I try to provide impact is actionable ideas. If someone says, I want to do public speaking, I might give them 2 or 3 specific ideas or resources where they can go to either hone their craft by doing, like I mentioned before, because that's the way I did it, or maybe they say I have this particular block. It's always helpful for me, with my busy schedule, to be able to provide something specific back. So people asking about public speaking, sometimes they ask about breaking into tech, or other times, sometimes people are like, I literally am applying right now to some of the same companies that you've been working at, and I want to know if you have any tips for me about that process. I like to tell people nowadays with my work at Sector, I literally spend all day poring over resumes and poring over application processes, and talking to recruiters in a setting that usually students or our customers aren't usually in, because it's a very low key, we're not asking them to get us a job, right? So we can ask certain questions and it's not taken a certain way. So those are some of the aspects of knowledge that I have about, our career field. And then also, of course, AI, where it's going, maybe who the top voices are, because it's always good to get information around that. So I suggest joining some of those similar communities if you're into it. Tech Ladies is definitely a great one because they have events and they have discounts and all kinds of things specifically for women in tech. And then also check out the Facebook groups. Sometimes there can be a lot of good knowledge about, what interns are doing, where they're applying, where they're finding success in the moment.
We would like you to give us key takeaways to high schoolers on how they can charter their dreams into reality. Maybe 3 or 4 key takeaways.
Yes, absolutely. So I mentioned 3, right? So, and I'll give an extra one, a bonus one on the end. So say yes to every new opportunity. So that means if you see something new, especially if you've already done something similar in the past, it's not about repeating the same ones over and over again. It's about going forward and building more competencies in other areas. And that's where don't do anything twice comes in, right? Being able to say, yes, I did that. And let me tell you how to do this so I can go on to my next step. I created a club called Space Broncos when I was in college. And this club was an interdisciplinary club meant to bring every student from every college, any interest, any degree, to work on space projects. My goal was, it's not just engineers, it's not just scientists. We can all build space projects and space tech. And so we had English majors, we had political science majors, and of course we had computer science majors and mechanical engineers. And then I literally told them, I'm only gonna be the president of this club for 1 year. I'm gonna make sure it gets set up, I'm gonna make sure it's done, but then I have to go on to do something else. Like I have to do more than just Space Broncos. And so that's what I did. And I figured out through that year who I would potentially hand the reins over to at the end of the year. And they're still going. I haven't been on that campus for 5 years and that club is still there and working. So I'm proud of that. And then the third key is make your accomplishments visible. So I have a personal website. I also use LinkedIn quite prolifically. And so I think those are really important to continue the conversation. My goal for anybody listening to this as a high schooler especially is that by the time you're my age, by the time you're looking for internships, people are hiring you for what you do well, what you're very much interested in, what you're passionate about, versus you going in just to explore, a whole new area. That's good too. So if that's your path, that's your path. Make it work for you. But the goal would be that people can start hiring you for things that you're really passionate about, and it will lead to other things. I went from mechanical engineering to robotics to AI to workforce equity, and that it's a connected chain. It wasn't an unbroken chain. So then the fourth, maybe bonus tip I would offer and key takeaway here is the mentorship aspect, which is find a posse. Find a posse. So that's what I did. I mentioned 2 mentors, but really I had a posse of mentors. I could be mentored by people younger than me in my career, outside of my career. If they had something to say, if they had a memento or a note of encouragement or a note of advice, I take the best pieces, the ones that apply directly to me, and then I would put them all together and make a plan, an actionable plan, one that I could take action on. But it was more about a posse method. I mentioned, right? Like those identities that you have, that you link to, they can be in all kinds of different mentors, you know, all different types of people, different careers, different ages, different genders. And so I would really suggest that you find yourself a posse of peers and people ahead of you. That way you just have the wealth of information that you need to make the most informed choice that you can.
Camille, can you give us key learnings about impactful leadership, a suggestion for professionals?
Yes. So I think impactful leadership is going to come down to, I mentioned consensus building. So we'll skip that one, right? But consensus building is very important. And learning how to do it amongst a lot of different people is very important. But then also inspiring projects, right? Projects that don't necessarily meet the status quo, but that take off in a different way, in a different direction. Being able to challenge that status quo is really important. When people say they can't, they often can, but they can do it maybe with support. You know, I don't know if you're familiar with the 4-point grading system. I used to have to go through this in school where like number 1 is like you get a 1 on it and it's like, okay, you really didn't do well, you have incomplete work. And number 2 is you have incomplete work and you had the right idea in mind. And then like that's number 2. Number 2 is you got complete work. But number 3 is you did it, but you did it with help and with a lot of support. And number 4 is you can do this so well that you can teach other people. And I feel like if we break down leadership in how we empower the people who are following us or the people who we're following, if they are doing those things where they're taking us up that 4-point system where we're starting to actually build competency, we're in the right space, or we're doing the right thing for the people who are following us. So I would always encourage you, if you're ever find yourself leading a club or a team, especially a technical team, figure out how you can empower people to not just do the work fully and understand it, but then to also be able to teach others how to do it. And that was kind of what I was trying to do at Space Broncos. I was like, I know what I want to do and I'm going to learn with you, but I'm hopefully empowering someone to take the reins here in the next year. I wanted to get to that 4-point system, like that number 4 on my scale really quickly in a year. And that was the goal I set for myself. So those are the types of leadership goals I set for myself. Yeah.
Camille, now there is a small rapid fire round for you. So I have 4 questions here.
All right.
Moon or Mars?
Say again?
Or Mars?
Moon or Mars?
Yeah.
Moon.
Dreams or goals?
Goals.
Optimism or reality?
Optimism, always optimism.
Space or Idaho?
Idaho. Go, go, go. I love Idaho. I think I still have a lot more work to do in Idaho before I go to space.
So Camille, we have a lot of questions from the audience here. And so firstly, I would like to ask about the robotic hand that you had created. So we would like to know more about this robotic arm, and was it a push-pull system that you had created?
Yes, it was. So I was schooled and instructed in learning how to do SolidWorks and CAD design, 3D CAD design in that first summer. Remember when I mentioned I had my freshman summer, I guess. I wasn't in an internship, I was in a lab. And so I was learning CAD and I was able to apply all that tool set to designing this random end effector that I had no idea like was going to be a hand until I said, yes, it's going to be a hand. And so what I had to do was I had the other intern that I mentioned that was helping me with the computer software system. We took her hand and we had her like hold it up at a 90-degree angle, and we had a scanner and we scanned her hand, like free scan her hand, and got all the pieces in place. And then we had to fix that design because when we brought it into the 3D CAD system, there were holes that I had to fill back in because the scanner just didn't pick up on them. And then once I did that, I had to figure out how was I going to actually like bring the fingers down. And so I realized I got to design my own set of fingers for this hand, the 3D printed hand. So I designed that. And then what we did was I made channels. I designed my own channel system because this was a solid block, this part of the hand that we scanned. It was just a solid block of 3D. That's not useful for a push-pull system, right? So I designed a channel system and then inserted servos in the right places. It was very custom, very bespoke. And then from there, it could draw down and do what it was supposed to do in line with the camera system.
Camille, don't do anything twice is something new. So why that rule for yourself?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And the idea again is about being able to grow and to expand your knowledge and not necessarily continue. Mastery is absolutely important, right? Absolutely master the things that you're working on. But sometimes mastery comes from trying things at different angles. So a lot of times, even though it was a lot bigger. So it wasn't that I wouldn't do public speaking twice. It's that I wouldn't be the president of Space Broncos twice. I would go on to be maybe the president of the National Society of Black Engineers at my school, or I would go on to work on some external experiences outside of my campus. And being able to do that meant I was usually using the same tool set of persuasion, consensus building, public speaking, but I did it in different settings. And that's really the crux of it. How can you build up your tool set, especially before you leave college or before you leave high school, so that way you're growing and expanding and you're an independent learner and thinker all on your own.
Camille, would you be able to suggest a source for older people, say senior citizen interns? Most intern programs are for younger generation and students still in colleges.
Okay, so it's a question about older students and older, not just high school students. Is that what the question is?
It's a specific at senior citizen interns.
Okay, awesome. I have not gotten that question before. So I think internships, especially the ones that I'm used to here in Silicon Valley, they really require a 4-year degree program. And they also don't necessarily, like you would want to look for internships that don't necessarily clamp down on all the specific demographics. So unfortunately, I don't think that there's like a resource for senior citizens, but what I can say is if you're starting out and you are in an accredited program, the idea would be that you could network your way into an internship, just like I did, right? I mentioned not applying. So the application process is what screens people out the most for not matching the demographics of what they were expecting. So if you can find your way to skip that process, with merit, we're not asking you to like subvert the way that, and not have a fair way of getting in, but we're asking, how can I network my way and talk about my accomplishments in a way that someone says, I need your skill set right now. A lot of times it's blending that identity into your work. So maybe you're working on projects that help target that area of product consumers. That might really help, right? Because you're bringing really important knowledge to that space of product design. You're in that space yourself. And so therefore you're building products for people like you. That could really help. So I don't think there's a list of resources specifically for that, but I do think as a senior citizen and someone who's aware that, you might not make the correct demographics for whatever they're aiming for, skip the demographic process, which is definitely the application process. Go to the networking, go to the, the referrals, go to the blended projects that really blend your identity with the work that you're doing. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Camille. I would like to read some of the student notes that they have put here. So we have from Sneha Jadhav. It was really nice to hear Camille speak. And she followed you on Twitter and she said, thank you. And then we have Ida who says, Camille, very inspirational. This is loaded. I learned so much from your talk and I'll be watching the recording so many times and I can't wait until I show it to my girls.
Oh,
and Susanna says it's very loaded and a lot to unravel and learn. So Camille, thanks for joining us
Yeah.
and coming here to Business School of AI, to WeeklyWed, to address the students and talk about your challenges that you faced and how you overcame them. And we're really thankful for all the key learnings that you gave us today. And we all thank you from WeeklyWed.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was my pleasure, and definitely willing to connect and happy to connect afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you for joining WeeklyWed. WeeklyWed is a happy place to share, learn, explore, and happens every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Catch you at the next WeeklyWed. Bye-bye.